The heat in Yazoo County, Mississippi, had reached 94 degrees before 10 in the morning on a Thursday in June, and Gunnery Sergeant Cole Deaton had been driving since before dawn with a photograph in his shirt pocket that had been there, in one pocket or another, for 9 years. In the passenger seat, Reaver lifted her head and looked at the tree line along Route 49, with the focused forward attention that meant she was not looking at the trees, but at something behind them. Ahead, at the gravel turnoff for a dirt road with no county marker, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat was dragging a section of garden hose across the yard of a farmhouse that sat back from the road in the shade of three old oaks. And when Cole slowed and looked at the house and then at the photograph in his hand, he stopped the truck and sat very still for a moment, because the porch in the photograph and the porch on that farmhouse were the same porch. What happened when that Marine walked up that driveway would reveal a secret that a man named Tommy Pruitt had been carrying since 2003, in the only way he had left to carry anything, which was to hand it to the man beside him and ask him to carry it instead. If stories about the ones who keep their word, even when the word was made by someone else, belong in your life, subscribe before we go any further. There are more of them, and everyone deserves to be told. Cole Deaton had joined the Marines at 19 because he was from Rolling Fork, Mississippi, and the men in Rolling Fork who had done something with the thing they were made of had mostly done it through service, and had inherited from his father and his grandfather the specific understanding that some choices are not choices so much as recognitions, the moment you see what you were going to do and simply begin doing it. He had served 12 years, 1 tour in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan, the second of which had ended in the Helmand River Valley in the fall of 2015, in a firefight outside a village called Musa Kala that Cole could not describe in full to anyone who had not been there and would not try to. He had come home to Mississippi at 31 with a service record that said honorable discharge, and a body that said the same, and a weight he carried in the specific quiet manner of a man who has decided that the carrying is permanent and has organized his life accordingly. It was 34 now. He did contract security work in Jackson, which kept him in Mississippi and kept him busy and kept him, on most days, close enough to useful that the weight did not press too hard. He drove the back roads on weekends. He visited his mother in Rolling Fork on Sundays. He had not, in 3 years of being home, fully unpacked the last deployment box that sat in the corner of his bedroom, because the last deployment box had things in it that he was not yet ready to be in the same room with in any kind of organized way. The photograph was not in the box. The photograph had never been in the box. It had been in his shirt pocket since the morning a corporal named Tommy Pruitt had pressed it into his hand in a field hospital outside of Kandahar in September 2015. 3 days before Tommy died of wounds he had sustained in the same firefight that Cole had walked out of, and which Cole had not, in 9 years, fully found a way to understand the arithmetic of. Tommy Pruitt had been 24 years old, and from a place he called the farm outside Yazoo City. And he had talked about that farm the way men talk about the place they are most themselves, not with nostalgia but with the specific authority of someone describing a fact. He had talked about the creek behind the south field and the way the heat came off the cotton in August, and a woman he called Mama Ruth, who was not his mother, but who had been the person on the farm since before he could remember, and who made a particular kind of cornbread that Tommy said was the only food he had encountered that actually improved with age. It had talked about her the way you talk about the people who are the fixed point everything else orients around. The morning before the surgery from which he did not wake, Tommy had given Cole the photograph. It was a snapshot, the kind taken on a phone and printed at a drugstore. The colors slightly oversaturated, the edges soft. A woman on a porch. Late afternoon light. She was looking at something off to the right, not at the camera, and she was laughing at whatever she saw. The full open laugh of a person who has not yet been told to hold herself back for the benefit of an audience. She was not young in the photograph. She was not old. She was exactly herself, which was the quality the photograph captured and which made it, Cole had always thought, the kind of photograph that cost something to carry. Tommy had said, "Her name's Ruth Pruitt. She's on the farm outside Yazoo City. If I don't make it back, she's going to need someone to check on her. She doesn't have people." He had pressed the photograph into Cole's hand and looked at him with the direct, undramatic eyes of a man who knows what is happening and has decided to use the time on the one thing that matters. You'll know the house by the porch, Cole had said. You're going to make it. Tommy had said, Cole, you'll know the house by the porch. He had known. He had known for 9 years and had been getting ready to know it, and had driven to Yazoo County 3 times over those 9 years, and each time had turned around on Route 49 before he reached the turnoff, because he was not yet the person who could do this right, and he owed it to Tommy to do it right. He was 34. He did not know if he was yet the person, but he had been driving since before dawn, and the photograph was in his pocket, and River had lifted her head at the tree line. And the woman in the wide-brimmed hat was crossing a yard he recognized. He stopped the truck. River was already at the window. River was a Vizsla, 4 years old, rust gold and lean, with amber eyes that gave her an expression of perpetual warm alertness, as though the world were a place that consistently delivered things worth paying attention to, and she intended not to miss any of them. She had been matched to Cole through a veteran placement program after her previous handler, a military working dog trainer who had retired. I'd recommended her specifically for a veteran who needed a dog that was responsive without being needy and present without being demanding. The coordinator had said, on the day Cole came to meet her, she'll read you faster than you read her. Give her a day. She had needed 4 hours. In the vehicle, she was a focused, professional presence, monitoring, cataloging, noting deviations from pattern in the specific way that distinguished her from a dog that was simply watching. When she lifted her head and fixed on something, Cole had learned across 4 years to treat it the way he treated information from a source that had never once been wrong. She was looking at the farmhouse. She was looking at the woman in the hat. Her tail moved once, slowly. Cole looked at the photograph. He looked at the porch. He pulled into the driveway. Her name was Ruth Pruitt, and she was 78 years old, and she had lived on the farm outside Yazoo City for 54 years, arriving in 1970 at 24 as the wife of a man named George Pruitt, who had farmed cotton and soybeans and raised 3 children on this land with a particular focused competence, of someone who had inherited something worth keeping and intended to keep it. George had died in 2009 of a stroke in the South Field in August, which was the way he would have chosen. And Ruth had stayed on the farm because the farm was hers and because leaving had never once been a thought she took seriously. She had raised those 3 children and seen them leave and seen 2 of them come back on holidays and 1 of them not come back at all, for reasons that Ruth described only as his life took him elsewhere, in the tone she used for things she had made her peace with even if the peace was not complete. She had kept the farm and the garden and a hen house with 6 hens that she called by names she had given them and whose personalities she could describe in detail, because paying close attention to small things was the habit of a woman who had spent 54 years understanding that the small things were not small. She had a great-nephew named Tommy. She had called him hers, not her great-nephew, because the technical relationship had never been the right word for what he had been to her. A child of her husband's cousin who had come to the farm at 7 when his mother could no longer keep him, and who had grown up in this house and on this land, as though it had always been the plan, which Ruth had always believed it had. Tommy had joined the Marines at 19 because he was brave and because he loved his country, and because Ruth had raised him to believe that the world was a place you showed up for rather than a clase you waited in. She had driven him to the recruiting office herself. She had gotten the notification in October 2015. She had been in the South Field when the car came down the driveway, and she had seen the uniforms through the tree gap before she reached the house, and she had known, with the specific knowledge that arrives before thought, what the uniforms meant. She had buried Tommy in the churchyard at First Baptist in Yazoo City on a Saturday in November. 200 people had come, which was the right number for a man who had been exactly himself everywhere he went. The minister had said that Tommy Pruitt was the kind of person who made rooms better simply by being in them, which Ruth had thought was true and insufficient and the best that words could do. She had kept the farm. She had kept the hens. She had kept his room exactly as it was for 6 months, and then she had packed it carefully into boxes and put them in the attic, not to forget but to preserve, because the things Tommy had touched deserved to be kept with intention, not abandoned to accumulation. She did not know on the Thursday morning in June, when she looked up from the garden hose and saw a man walking up her driveway with a rust gold dog at his side, that he had been trying to find her for 9 years. She did not know that he had a photograph in his shirt pocket. She did not know that the last thing Tommy Pruitt had done, before the surgery he did not wake from, was make sure she would not be alone. Have you ever been asked to carry something for someone who didn't come home? A photograph, a promise, a name written in a notebook, a story you were the last one left to tell? If something like that is sitting in your chest right now, stay with this story. Tell me about it in the comments. Those names deserve to be spoken. Cole came up the driveway slowly, the way you approach something you have been approaching for 9 years and do not want to rush now that you are finally close. River walked at his left side without needing to be told. Ruth looked at him from under the brim of her hat with the direct assessment of a woman who had spent 54 years reading the people who came down her driveway and knew which kind of arrival. This was before he reached the yard gate. She said, "Can I help you?" He said, "Ma'am, my name is Cole Deaton. I served with Tommy Pruitt." Ruth Pruitt set down the garden hose. She was very still. He said, "I've been wanting to come for a long time. I'm sorry it took me this long." She looked at him for a moment with the expression of a woman receiving something she had given up expecting and had not in the giving up stopped hoping for. Then she looked at River, who had gone to the yard gate and sat down on the other side of it and was looking up at Ruth with the warm amber attention of a dog that has assessed this person and found everything in order. Ruth said, "Come in." She led him to the porch. She brought out 2 glasses of sweet tea and did not ask if he wanted any, because the South has its own grammar around hospitality and asking is not part of it. She sat in the chair on the left side of the porch, and he sat in the one on the right, which was where she gestured. And River went to the top porch step and lay down in the shade of the railing and exhaled slowly as if she had been holding herself in readiness for a long time and could finally let it go. Cole reached into his shirt pocket. He took out the photograph. He held it for a moment before he placed it on the porch table between them. Ruth looked at it. She looked at herself on that porch in that light, laughing at something she no longer remembered, with the full openness of a person who had not yet had the October day in 2015 as part of her history. She was quiet for a long time. She said, "Where did he have that?" Cole sighed. "He carried it." He said it simply, because the simple version was the true version. "He showed it to me once when we were between operations. A side, it talked about this place the way some men talk about the place they're from, like it was the answer to a question nobody had asked yet." He stopped. He looked at the yard and the oaks and the south field beyond them, and he understood for the first time exactly what Tommy had been describing when he talked about the farm. "He gave it to me the morning before the surgery. He said you didn't have people and he needed someone to check on you." Ruth said, "I have people." She said it quietly, without defense. It was simply also true. Cole sighed. "I know. I think he meant someone who knew him, someone who could tell you that he wasn't scared, that he was himself right up until he wasn't." He looked at his hands. "I wanted to come and tell you that he was himself. He talked about your cornbread. He talked about the creek. It talked about the way the heat comes off the cotton in August. He talked about you like you were the fixed point." Ruth was quiet again. The heat held the porch in the specific stillness of a Mississippi morning, when the air is not moving yet and the day is what it is going to be. She reached over and picked up the photograph. She held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time. She said, "He was 7 when he came here. It didn't know how to hold a fork right." She said it with the fond precision of someone describing a thing they memorized long ago because it was worth memorizing. "I taught him. He learned fast. He learned everything fast." Cole sighed nothing. River had come from the porch step and placed herself at Ruth's feet without being invited, and was lying there with her chin on her front paws, amber eyes open. Ruth said, "You said you've been wanting to come for a long time." Cole said, 9 years. She said, "What stopped you?" He looked at the yard. He said, "I wanted to do it right. I didn't know what right looked like." Ruth said, "You came. That's what right looks like." She cited the way she said things, plainly, without decoration, as a simple statement of the true thing. She had spent 54 years on this farm saying the true thing plainly, and she was not going to change her practice now. Cole looked at the photograph still in her hands. He said, "He wanted you to have it back. He just needed someone to get it there." She looked at him across the porch table. She said, "You carried it 9 years." He said, "Yes, ma'am," she said. "Then you did your job." She sided with the full weight of what she meant. Not dismissal, completion. The thing had been carried. It had arrived. The account was settled. Unsettled, in her understanding of the word, did not mean over. It meant right. If you were carrying something for someone who didn't come home, a promise, a name, something they handed you because you were the one who was still there, would you have found the courage to walk up that driveway? Type yes or no in the comments. Cole had turned around twice before. The third time he didn't. What came after was not a single event, but an accumulation of small ones, which is how the most important things usually arrive. Cole drove back to Yazoo County the following Saturday. He did not plan to make it a habit, and it became one anyway, the way things become habits when they are meeting a need that was already there. He fixed the gate latch that had been stiff since spring. He looked at the henhouse roof, which needed attention, and addressed it on the Saturday after that. Ruth taught him her cornbread recipe, not from a card, because it was not written down, but from demonstration, which was how she had always taught things. He was not naturally talented at cornbread. She was patient with him in the specific way of someone who has spent decades teaching people things they cannot yet do, and has learned that patience is not a gift to the student, but a discipline of the teacher. Reaver was at home on the farm from the first Saturday. She monitored the south field and the hen house and the yard and the creek with the comprehensive attentiveness of a dog that has assessed a new operational environment and determined it to be worth full coverage. The hens had opinions about her. She filed their opinions and moved on. On a Sunday in September, Cole drove Ruth to First Baptist in Yazoo City, which was the church Tommy had been buried from and which Ruth had attended for 50 years, and which had a pew, third row on the left, that Ruth called Tommy's pew. Not because he had sat there particularly, but because the light from the east window fell on it exactly right on September mornings, and Tommy had loved good light. Cole sat in that pew. The choir sung something old and slow and entirely true, and he sat in the light that fell through the east window on a September morning in Mississippi and let it land on him. On something that had been held at a particular tension since 2015 shifted. Not released, shifted. The way a weight shifts when it has been moved to a place where it can finally be carried differently. He had been carrying the photograph for 9 years. He had not known, until the morning he placed it on a porch table in Yazoo County, that it had been carrying something too. A thread between two people that had been waiting for the person in the middle to stop turning around on Route 49 and walk up the driveway. Tommy Pruitt had been 24 years old when he pressed that photograph into Cole Deaton's hand and said, "You'll know the house by the porch." He had been right about the porch. He had been right about everything else too. That Ruth would need someone who knew him. That Cole was the someone. That the farm outside Yazoo City was the kind of place a person came to and stayed. And that the distance between a man doing his job and a man doing the right thing is often no distance at all. It is simply the driveway. This story is for everyone who has been carrying something for someone who didn't come home. You did your job. It's all right to put it down now, or to carry it somewhere it was always supposed to go. Is there a Tommy in your life? Someone who didn't come home? Whose name you still carry? Who asked you to remember something or someone, and whose ask you have not yet answered? Tell me about them in the comments. Let this section be full of the ones who trusted someone to remember. Every story on this channel is about choosing not to look away. If that means something to you, subscribe so you're here for the next one. There are more stories waiting to be told. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.